Good morning and welcome to today's Wellness Wise webinar, Healthy Workplaces, Global Perspectives and Best Practice. My name is Katrina Walton. I'm founder and director of Wellness Designs. We're a boutique workplace wellness business that specialises in strategic consultancy, speaking and training services. And we're passionate about creating healthy, safe and high-performing workplaces. We're very privileged today to have our guest facilitator, Wolf Kirsten, who is co-founder at the Global Centre for Healthy Workplaces and founder of International Health Consulting, who joins us from Tucson, Arizona today. And judging from today's turnout, our biggest webinar to date, certainly a global conversation it will be, with wellness advocates joining us from across Europe, Africa, North America, and also Australasia. So to those joining us for the first time, a warm wellness welcome. And for those returning, particularly our Wellness Designs clients, welcome back. If you're joining us today, you're probably either responsible for leading the employee wellness strategy in your organisation, or you may be seeking to develop a results-orientated and sustainable workplace wellness strategy for your organisation or clients. And as we've experienced, certainly working in such roles in our 23 years in the field, you may be feeling overwhelmed, you may be feeling isolated, and really unsure whether you're spending your precious time, money and resources in the right place. And you may also be finding it really hard to stay abreast of trends, particularly in a rapidly changing industry. Well, in that instance, you're certainly in the right place. And today's webinar will really help you keep ahead of the game. Wolf is going to reveal current global workplace wellness trends, including key drivers, growth areas, metrics and challenges, together with showcasing best practice examples across the globe, both large and small. So before we introduce Wolf, I'd just like to go over a couple of housekeeping items just to get the most out of the webinar today. You will have the opportunity to ask questions as we go along. We will hold those though until the end. So just to reassure you, we will allow enough time there. And also you have the opportunity, if you need to chat with us, the organisers at any time, you've got that chat box there as well. If you are wanting to spread the wellness message during the session, our handle for both Twitter and Instagram is #WellnessWise. And also, we'd love you to stay, again, to the end, where we'll also send a very brief evaluation survey following the session. Just a couple of questions where we'd love you to take a moment just to give us your constructive feedback as to how you found today's session, but also to help guide us for future planning as well. So without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce Wolf Kirsten. Wolf is a social entrepreneur and founder of International Health Consulting based in Arizona. His consulting portfolio is truly global, advising companies on health and wellbeing strategies such as Johnson & Johnson, IBM, Siemens and SAP in many regions of the world. And in addition, he has consulted the World Health Organization on developing global guidelines for healthy workplaces. Wolf is co-founder of the Global Centre for Healthy Workplaces, which hosts the Global Healthy Workplace Awards each year, which is happening in Melbourne this year, as well as certifies enterprises as healthy workplaces. He has lectured and published extensively on the global aspects of health promotion and wellness, including the book Global Perspectives in Workplace Health Promotion, of which we're very pleased to have a copy on our shelf, and which we also have as recommended reading for our practitioner training. Wolf is a German native and has lived many years abroad. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure to welcome Wolf.
Thank you. Thank you, Katrina, for the nice introduction, and thank you also for setting up or for providing the opportunity to talk about global perspectives. So thank you so much for that. And thank you everybody who's joined the webinar. It's really a pleasure to present today. Especially, it's very timely, as Katrina just alluded to, going down to Australia, to Melbourne in about 5 weeks for the Global Healthy Workplace Summit, co-hosted with Monash University. So we really feel privileged to be down there and to have another good event. But I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the webinar, but hopefully you've already heard about it. So that would be great. So this is my outline, what I would like to cover here in the next half hour plus or so. So global perspectives, what is really going on in the working world with regard to health and well-being? and also talk about some programming trends. What are different countries and different companies doing? What are really the trends at the moment? I will talk about a global approach, a global approach to a healthy workplace, I should say, the 5 keys from the World Health Organization. I think that's, at least from the Global Center for Healthy Workplaces, the view, that's the go-to reference point for us. Then I will talk about some good practices, what we have seen through our awards applications and our certification applications from many different countries from across the world. And then we'll have some ample time on questions from you. So hopefully get your pens ready, or get your keyboard ready, obviously, to ask some questions. So let me start with this piece of news. You may have seen this. This came out of the United States. So I am based here in the United States. I'm from Germany, as Katrina mentioned. I still have an office there too, and I spend quite a bit of time over in Europe. But at the moment I'm in the US, and this news came across my desk with the Business Roundtable, which is I think a US-based organization of 180 plus companies, large companies mostly, where the CEOs are members, and they kind of for the first time recognized in terms of being a company, a profitable company, that for the benefit that they lead their companies for the benefit of all stakeholders. So that's kind of the difference. It's not just the shareholders anymore. So it's about customers, employees, suppliers, and communities. Now, I think we probably all agree that this is no news, and we've been working on this area, or at least one of those areas, for many years. But this coming from the very top and in form of a consortium here is powerful. I think it's powerful for any CEO to come out and say that, and there have been quite a few, but for 181 CEOs coming out and saying this, it's really not about just making money anymore. Obviously that's important, but it's more than that. So I think that's a strong statement, and hopefully they'll follow it up and walk the talk, right? I think that's always the key. So getting into some trends. The 2018 Global Wellbeing Survey from Buck Consulting just came out last year, and Buck conducts this survey every other year, and I typically work and help them get some traction around the globe. So it's an employer survey, I should say. So employers are asked, what are you doing in terms of well-being? How do you do it? Why are you doing it? And a variety of different questions along those lines. So you can see here that the global scope, 56 countries represented, millions of employees. And this year was or last year I should say, was kind of the first time they expanded the definition to well-being. And that's definitely a big trend to begin with in the United States, but I see that globally as well, that it's moving from more of a physical health, wellness perspective to well-being. So I don't want to get into too much terminology, but that's definitely kind of a very common term these days, and as you will attest, especially also financial well-being. So let me get into some trends here, and then I will also draw from a few other surveys which complement this global survey nicely, I think. So in terms of the objectives, when the companies were asked, what are you trying to achieve with your well-being program, we see a whole host of different reasons here. And I'm sure you will find a lot of these, or you are familiar with a lot of these. Improving employee engagement, morale, performance and productivity, recruitment and retention is a top one too. And then you have this healthcare insurance cost issue, which if you go across the row, is still the number one in the United States. So for all of the US professionals, maybe we have some on the call, will be very familiar with that. That's still the main driver of trying to reduce the healthcare costs. But in most other countries of the world, it can be still a driver, but it's never the top driver. It's usually around these other areas that I just outlined, or maybe some others like workability. I mean, I know that's a big one in Europe. It could be your image, of course, absenteeism. I mean, depending on the industry, but that's always a big driver. And then if you go all the way down, which kind of reflects the slide that I threw out there in the beginning, fulfilling social and community responsibilities. So I think you are seeing this these days, that employers are kind of pushed a little bit towards social responsibility. There's higher demands, there's more expectations, especially from the younger generation these days. So that I think that's going to increase. And that was what the Business Roundtable, is kind of reacting to. Moving on, this is a survey, different survey, but it fits nicely here, I think. This is from Workplace Health in America, and it's huge sample size. I think it's only been done twice, but there's a huge gap in between, but that's probably more detail than you need to know. But it's very interesting. So all kinds of employers, different sizes, were asked, are you offering a workplace health promotion program? Any type of workplace health promotion program. So the number was, it's about half, 46% of those participating in this, large survey. As you can see here, no surprise, I think, typically, you have your larger organizations offering, almost, 90 or almost all of them, like 92% of companies with 500 more employees offer a program. The question was asked as a follow-up, how many of you offer a comprehensive health promotion program? And the CDC defined it with these 5 elements. You will see them down here: health education, links related to employee programs or services, a supportive physical and social environment, integration of health promotion into the organizational culture, employee screenings with adequate treatment and follow-up. So, we can argue about what is a comprehensive program, but that's how they defined it. And you'll see the number goes down drastically. It's really interesting. So down to 12%, or 11.8 if you want to be exact, from 46. So that's a big drop. And same with look at the large enterprise. It's less than half of the number. So it's really about what do you as an employer offer, and how effective is it? And I think we all agree that if you only offer one element, let's say it's a biometric health screening, you probably won't get the results that you would like. So a comprehensive program, again, the definitions may be slightly different, especially depending by country, but it's really important. So this is the United States, where the field has a long history. And you can see how small the number is. So that shows you how much work I think we all have to do. Moving on, so go through the next few slides a little bit quicker, but so here we have the key areas of well-being, and this is, as I said earlier, the survey was expanded the definition a little bit to well-being, and so you can see a whole host of different areas which kind of under the umbrella of well-being. Obviously physical health, but then you have financial security, and a little further down, financial skills, literacy. Mental well-being is, I'll talk a little bit more about mental well-being. That's a very big issue these days for most employers. And if you go further down, goes to community involvement, environmental, social responsibility, and then, sense of purpose. So well-being is a pretty broad area. I think we all agree. I won't go into the specifics here in terms of the percentages, but you can take away here that being at the top, like physical health, still kind of quote unquote rules. I think there's still a lot of programs, and obviously there's nothing wrong with that. You still need to address your physical health and your biometric indicators. You can't just ignore them. But I think we agree that it's a larger area, larger scope in terms of well-being. So the companies were asked, again, this is the Buck survey, were asked what kind of issues are you trying to change or to improve with your well-being program? And maybe no surprise, stress, physical activity and exercise, nutrition or healthy eating, kind of at the top. And nice to see here that all of the participating Australian and New Zealand employees were kind of covering that. But again, I think that the message here is it's a long list. So a lot of companies are trying to touch upon or improve a lot of issues. Of course, there's overlap. There's between a number of those. But so I think in terms of comprehensive programming, it's also about looking at all these different issues. Of course, depends on your population and making sure that your population has, your employee population has some of these challenges or needs. That's really key. So let's move to programs then. So that what they're trying to address these issues, and here are the programs with what they're trying to improve, stress, physical activity, and so on. Interestingly enough, maybe no surprise to some of you, EAP, employee assistance programs, I know they're pretty prevalent in Australia as well. They're at the top. So as the most prevalent one, and then some other familiar ones, health screenings, I already mentioned, flexible work policies, immunizations, that depending on the year, it can go higher in terms of what's really going on in terms of disease, infectious disease, HRAs, and so on. Again, it's a whole host of programming elements or programs. One more comment on this slide I think really interesting is if you look at that effectiveness slide, or bar, I should say, it's less, right? So let's say, so many offer a program, 80% or 85% or whatever it is, but the effectiveness, as they were asking me, how effective are these programs, do you think, or is your program effective? The number is some much lower, with some incrementally lower. So, but that's not good, right? You would think, if you offer a program, you would think, well, we believe that it's effective. And this is not even about proving it, it's just about, do you think your program is effective? So, there's many ways to look at it and discuss. Maybe interesting, maybe we have time in the Q&A time to discuss that a little bit more. But I think it's really interesting to see that, like they offer these programs, but they may not even believe if they're effective. So why do you offer them? You could throw that out. I thought it was kind of an interesting part of the survey. Future offerings, like, do you plan it to offer next year and 2 years and so on? I won't go into all of these, but of course, some of the same as already offered. Workplace health challenges and competitions, I think that's a big one. I think more and more companies are kind of jumping onto that bandwagon. Stress management or resilience building still remains very high. A lot of online courses, but others, some more conventional methods like HRAs and screens are still up there. So for those who haven't offered it yet or are not offering it yet, so there's still some growth in those areas as well. So this comes from a different source, as you can see in the bottom. This is a survey of large benefits providers and brokers in the United States who work with a lot of clients. So the aggregated number in terms of employees is in the millions. But it's really interesting to see that you have in terms of what are your clients doing, and specifically, are they doing more or less was a question here in past years. And so first look at a slide, it looks like, well, most companies are actually doing more. So you have prioritizing wellness or well-being as an objective. You have first mobile or mobile app programs for your employees, designing, it should say there, a platform, finding out about a platform for all of your initiatives, like online, obviously, and so on. So they're all doing more. This is in the last few years. If you go down, it's really that some categories, it's only 2, but some categories had less, which I thought was interesting. And first one is about, carrier wellness programs. It's more of a US focus here in terms of, let's say, a health insurance or a plan has their kind of standard out-of-the-box wellness program. So it seems like less of focusing on that. But I thought the last one was concerning, implementing outcomes-based wellness programs. So it's a little bit of a head scratcher, but maybe it's around, as you will know, and it'd be interesting to hear from you or from anybody, but us in Australia, in terms of a return on investment, ROI, how many companies are actually looking for that? Because in the United States, that's kind of been the holy grail for many years, but we've had this shift now to more of a VOI, a value on investment. For a variety of reasons. I think the wellness field has been kind of under siege in some ways from critics, and you can pick holes in a lot of studies, as you can imagine, and the ROI numbers often do not hold up. So I think that's where it's coming from. But having said that, my belief is there are some studies or enough studies out there to prove the evidence. But ROI is difficult, like the financial benefits are difficult. So now I'd like Katrina to launch the first, Katrina, sorry, the first poll question in terms of turning it over to you and what you have experienced or are experiencing. So are you or your clients investing more, less, or the same, in wellness in recent years, in the past years? So more, less, or the same? Give you a few moments here or to respond to that.
Right. So if you could answer the question 1, so whether you feel it's more, less, or the same. It appears our polling questions may be quite skewed there. Here we go. If we can just answer question 1 there, yeah, more, less, or the same. We'll come to question 2 in a moment.
Okay, yeah.
So far, Wolf, we're hovering around which is encouraging, 79% more. I'll just wait for those final numbers to come in.
Okay, yeah, we can wait a few.
Moving a bit.
Mm-hmm. Maybe some need to think about.
Yes, some contemplating.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll just wait another moment. Okay, so it appears where we've landed there, Wolf, is 67% more and 30% the same.
Nobody less?
3%, I think it was less.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. I think that's good. I think that's more encouraging than we saw from the shortlister survey I just presented, where we had quite a few. And, of course, it was more nuanced depending on what, but we had quite a larger number doing less. So mostly, as Katrina mentioned, the majority, 2/3 more, and about 1/3 less the same. So I think that's good. I think, looking at it on a global scale, there's no, as far as I know, global number on this, but I think that kind of is in line with what I have seen in many different countries and regions. There seems to be growth, in various sectors, employer sizes. I would tend to, without having, again, hard numbers, I would tend to agree with that most companies, they see the value, they see the need to invest more, and they are. I see more of I would say kind of a measured growth, that's kind of my observation on that. It's not exponential, but I see more and more companies getting into it or investing more. So good to see that it's the same trend in Australia and New Zealand.
And Wolf, would it be fair to say we're observing, I know certainly with our clients and practitioners, where they might be spending their saying they're being more considered and they're wanting to do it right this time, so to speak. So they're taking a more needs-based and results-oriented approach. Are you observing the same?
Yes, I think so. I think I kind of hesitate a little bit with my yes, but like on the one hand, I do see in our awards program, and maybe related to the criteria, because they're fairly stringent criteria and they're comprehensive. We have seen that trend over the last 7 years, as long as we've been doing it, that the applications are stronger. We have less applications where you can right away see, they don't really have a true, program in place, a true strategy in place, and all that. So that's been an encouraging trend. So I think they're more nuanced and more needs-based and so on. But having said that, like if I look at the United States, and I'll mention a little bit about later, I see a lot of programs which are very quote unquote simplistic and rely heavily on either their insurance carrier or on incentives. So I'll mention a little bit more incentives later, but they think that's a program to provide incentives to live healthy or participate in wellness programs. So, okay.
Great, thanks, Will.
Should we move on?
Fantastic.
Yeah, okay. So This is from the same survey. I'll go through this pretty quickly. The short list of one, again, this is the benefits group or benefits brokers. I thought it was just interesting to get another view in terms of what are kind of the trends. Top 3 in terms of must-haves: wellness platform, challenges, HRA. I thought that was interesting. And the same on the other hand, the top 3 declining. You have you by metrics, but you also have an HRA health risk assessment. And I've seen that depending on who you talk. Some say, well, they're done. We're not even looking at HRAs anymore because your well-being platform, pulse surveys, all that data, wearables that you get, don't need a health risk assessment anymore. Others think there's a lot of value in doing that. It's more structured. It's a more comprehensive data source. It's much more evidence-based, all that stuff. And you can make a case for both, I think. But I thought that was kind of interesting, and it kind of reflected here in this this survey. So moving on, I want to say a few things about mental well-being. And stress, as you can see here, it's 20% water, 80% stress. I think a lot of employees have reactions like that. And I really like this kind of flow chart, if you will, on stressors and psychosocial risks in the workplace. I know that it's a key issue in Australia and in some other countries too, in terms of not just placing it on the individual and how they can become more resilient and being able to cope with all the demands being placed on them, but it's really about your work environment, your psychosocial work environment. So I always like throwing this up to kind of drive home the point of the impact, right? Of the impact, your job, content, your workload, your schedule, obviously, your relationships, your role, if you know what you're doing in the organization, if you can identify with that. These things play a huge role, and psychosocial risk assessment is part of legislation in some countries, as you will know. So it is a big deal, and I still see a lot of room for improvement, especially in the United States. I think that there is, but also in some other European countries where it is legislation, where they have legislation. I think there's still room for improvement. So going to Europe here, just complementing it again with the European survey. This is another big survey from the European Agency for Safety and Health in Bilbao, where they were asking companies a variety of different questions. I picked out the ones on psychosocial risks. So here are a couple of things just so you get an idea of what these companies have been doing. Reorganization of work to reduce demands and pressure, counseling, conflict resolution, trying to an intervention against long irregular hours. And again, the message here is look at the number of companies implementing them, and it's pretty small, right? It's less than half for most. Again, the larger ones do a little bit more, but not much. So it's really still a nascent area. It's early on, I think, where companies, employers of various sizes, some of these are very small, by the way, which is not uncommon in Europe, implement these measures. And if you go down, well, why are there only so few? What are the difficulties? What are the barriers? And here are 4 different ones listed. Kind of the stigma, the reluctance to talk about it, lack of expertise. I thought that was interesting. Lack of awareness among staff and lack of awareness among management. And the major one was kind of the stigma issue. And interestingly, it was higher in larger companies. More of a stigma to come out and talk about mental health or about psychosocial risks. And then also the lack of awareness is still pretty high. So again, we have I think a long way to go to drive home our point here. And again, I think it's interesting that in some countries you have legislation. In some you have standards or voluntary standards. In Canada, and it still doesn't drive home the point. It kind of, I think, with some employers, especially if they've really focused on safety and have a risk assessment, protocol in place. This is now an added layer which fits nicely. It's not just about physical risk, but psychosocial risk. So they are often more apt to kind of adopt this kind of approach, but still not enough, I think, overall in terms of employers. So getting to this incentive question or issue. So that'd be interesting to hear from you guys, maybe not now, maybe in Melbourne at the Global Healthy Workplace Summit, but how many how many of you offer any kind of incentive? So you will, for those of you, familiar with the US system will know that, the healthcare system is structured in a way that the employer plays a huge role and carries the majority of the costs, right? So they have a direct incentive to get employees healthier in terms of actual, monetary value. So a lot, and now it's allowed in terms of legislation. There's some guidance around it, what the percentage can be, and how you can structure incentive programs. So it's not a free for all, but nevertheless, you've seen some pretty big growth. And this is, I thought, like in this survey, just imagine a high number, right? This is an average employee incentive amount for this survey. Probably mostly larger companies, as far as I know, the National Business Group on Health. 784, that's a large number. So companies really putting some money behind it and believe that they can kind of bend the curve, the healthcare cost curve this way in terms of incenting with the hope that employees live healthier, have healthier behaviors, drive down kind of some of these major indicators, whether it's obesity or blood pressure or diabetes, and all of you know how difficult that is, right? Behavior change is difficult. And it really depends on your incentive program, how it is structured. And by the way, there's very little evidence out there in terms of the effectiveness of incentives in terms of behavior change, sustained behavior change, I should say. There's some evidence on, obviously participation, getting employees in the foot in the door, getting them in the door, all that stuff, which is important, but it's not necessarily going to change the employees' health behaviors. And I personally think that too many employers believe in this without having the supporting structure, without having all these other measures and an environment which is necessary to create that change. Just quickly on technology, I think you will all agree that it's a growth area, for many reasons. We're seeing, more and more online apps, portals, platforms, whatever you want to call them. I think some companies are relying on them too much, thinking, okay, we provide the portal for the employees, with all these different resources, and it's going to work. And it's not going to work. So, but of course, at the same time, employees expect that, as everything else being digitalized these days, that's the same with wellness. So I think we're going to see more growth on it, and it's just going to be more nuanced, just like with many other areas. What is a good, what is effective technology with regard to wellness? That's really the question. I think the word is still out. It's still early in that area. Talking about AI, right? That's going to be a huge one, but I won't get into that right now. This is back to the Buck survey, the Global Wellbeing Survey, and this is always an area which really gets to me, because if you ask the participants in this survey, do you measure specific outcomes from your programs? It's only half, and you would think this is probably a more motivated or progressive crowd in a sense of employers, right? That there's kind of a bias, I would think, that taking part. So it's a low number. I think it should be more than half. Good to see the high number in Australia. We could talk about that, what it may be related to. But overall, I think the number is still low. I think we have work to do. Some of the reasons for that are here: insufficient resources. You hear that a lot, I think, to support measurement. I think probably a valid point, but do you always need a lot of resources to measure? I think you don't necessarily. It really depends on what you want to do. So that you can address that with a company who if that's their argument, we don't have resources to measure it. So you can address it, I think, in many ways. Do not know how to measure. I think that's not good, but it's a smaller number. No priority from leadership. I thought that was kind of interesting. Usually leadership wants the data, want to know, is it effective or not? And then also somebody don't believe there's a return. I thought that was kind of interesting. So, again, we have a work cut out in kind of educating and making it clear, there is a way to measure. It doesn't always have to be an, ROI calculation or analysis. So it's difficult to do. Couple of words on well-being, mental well-being metrics, before I get into the global model. This, I think, is important because mental well-being is such a major issue, and companies are struggling with it. So, often the question is, well, how do we know and how do we measure it? It's such a complex area. And as you can see, it is complex in terms of the amount of different indicators that companies are using or tracking. For a lot of companies, especially larger ones, their engagement survey, or some call it a people survey, or if you will, satisfaction survey, is kind of the major indicator, which also makes it to the top. As you can see here, the difference between tracking and leadership seeing it is very small. So that's typically, you know, high priority within a company, and leadership will typically see the results, or, you know, at least a summary. Retention and turnover, I think that's a logical indicator. HRA scores, you know, in terms of using those, or maybe even have a subset in mental health and mental well-being. EAP is, of course, naturally there's a link there. It's a matter of how do you look at it, or how do you interpret it. You know, high utilization, low utilization, what do you want? I mean, there's you know, ways to address that or talk about it, what's good, quote unquote, good and bad. And, you know, sick leave obviously is a big one, especially due to mental illness. If you have that data, I mean, because, you know, a lot of companies don't have that data in countries, and disability as well. So it is complex. It's a complex area, and but you need to track it somehow, just like you need to measure it to figure it out. So shifting from our global trends and our global perspectives to a kind of a global model. So that the WHO, the World Health Organization, in Geneva, about 9 years ago, came up with this model. I was actually part of the global working group behind this. And it was really interesting. I mean, there's different backgrounds from a variety of different countries, obviously, putting this together. And I thought, you know, I still think it's pretty relevant globally. I still have to meet an employer who said, you know, this doesn't work for us. It's too technical, or it's too something. So I think it kind of hits it in many ways well. And just quickly to give you an overview, I could talk about this model for hours, but and hopefully some of you or most of you have seen this before. But it's complex. So you have your physical work environment, to a large degree. Occupational health and safety, you know, covers it, but not only. Then you have your personal health resources, you know, which is a lot about, you know, your lifestyle programs, your wellness programs. You're trying to improve some of your personal health. Then to the left, as I talked about earlier, you have your psychosocial work environment. And then also the role that the enterprise plays in the community in terms of health. You know, do they support the community? So at least, you know, that the you know, immediate community or wider community, if you will, are not, you know, unhealthy or unhealthier. That would not be good. And then in the center, you will recognize a continual improvement cycle here. Very straightforward, but a lot of companies don't follow it still, unfortunately. And then you have your ethics and values. I think that's very important to have it at the very center. And then, of course, leadership engagement, at the same time, worker involvement. You know, so a lot of companies are strong on leadership engagement, but sometimes not so much on worker involvement. So I think those two are really key. So that's really it in a nutshell, like 4 major areas which all overlap. I think you see that, and that's important. So they should be integrated, physical and psychosocial and personal health. There's many ways to integrate it, and you should, you know, to not have silos within one company. And then you really need your needs assessment. You need to figure out what are the major challenges within a company. How do you address them? And what are your measures? How do you evaluate them? So hopefully you got a good overview here in the limited time that I have. But this leads us to the next poll question. So which area of those 4, as you can see here, physical work environment, psychosocial work environment, your personal health resources, and then your enterprise community involvement, is the most robust or advanced in your company? So,
right, thanks, Wolf. So that's question 2 we're answering now in our poll. So we'll just wait for those responses to come through, Wolf. So far it's looking fairly evenly split between the top 3. About a third each.
Wow.
Okay, so it appears approximately 31% for physical work environment, Wolf, 33% psychosocial, and 29% for personal health, and 7% for enterprise community.
Interesting. Very interesting. Obviously, you know, I did a very quick job defining these, and so some of you may not exactly know, but hopefully you do what these areas are. That's good. That's really interesting to see the balance between the first three. Typically, what we see on a global scale, again, going through the applications, because there you see, you know, once you go through the applications, you can see it very clearly in terms of their programs, what they're doing, an employer, that depending on the industry, obviously that plays a role, I should say that, of the sector. You know, the physical work environment could be, you know, very important, you know, oil industry, construction industry, those things. You know, that's their priority, which doesn't mean they should neglect the others. But typically we see A and C as the strongest areas, you know, depending on the industry. Personal health resources like wellness programs, you know, lifestyle programs are typically very high or a large number. And psychosocial still, I think, as I said earlier, neglected to a degree. So we see less in terms of prevalence or quality. And then the fourth one is, I would, you know, typically see higher than this sample, because most companies have community programs and efforts. But again, they have to be linked to their health program in some ways. It just can't be a quote unquote random you know, a program which doesn't have anything to do with health and well-being. But that's good to hear, and it's good to hear also for me, because at the Global Summit we have 4 roundtables on these areas. So, and we were not quite sure yet how to, you know, divvy them up in terms of amount of people. So that'd be interesting. So thanks for your participation there. So the last, I guess, let's say, you know, 5 minutes or so, I know we want to leave time for Q&A. I want to talk about some of the global model, and then moving into some of the good practices that we see globally. So this comes from the WHO model. You see that's the circle again here from the center of the model. And they define them as the 5 keys, which I think are well put. So, you know, leadership, commitment, engagement, your worker involvement, you know, business ethics and legality. You know, that's, you got to mention that. You know, it's not self-understood. Obviously, a lot of companies still don't follow that, and especially with regard to health. You know, as I mentioned earlier, in some countries, psychosocial risk assessment is legislated, but not all companies really implement that. Sustainability is a key. And sustainability in this sense is meant as program sustainability. So I need to clarify that, that, you know, that it's not just a one-off budget, you know, part of your business structure. So you know, you're going to have the program down 5-10 years, regardless of economic changes, personnel changes, all that. A lot of companies struggle with that still. And then the integration of those areas. That's very important. A siloed approach has many problems. And then following the cycle, I think that's another really important key. So through the Global Awards program, again, the criteria are directly aligned to the model I'm just showing you. But as you see, the disclaimer here, the WHO does not officially endorse that. I should mention that, but that's you know, to make it clear, they don't endorse any kind of private employee who may have a great program. So that's the policy. So here we see our past, or some, I should say, past winners. So some company names you will recognize right away. I know I think we even have some on the call. So congratulations. You know, some of the big names that you will recognize, you know, Lendlease coming from Australia, obviously, you know, Chevron, Unilever, IBM, big companies. And then, you know, large enterprises. Monash University, this year's host, won it like 3 years ago. I think really good program, those of you familiar with it. So that's wonderful. And then if you go further down, you know, there's companies we never have heard of, probably, maybe, you know, in terms of the small and medium-sized enterprises. Most of these are, I would say, more in the medium-sized category. We haven't had any micro enterprises, and as you can imagine, it's a whole new set of challenges there, winning the award. But these are great companies, and most of these companies, they bring their CEO to the awards program and they present on stage, and that, as I said earlier, that's really powerful to have a CEO come and just, walk the talk right there. That's really, and it's just easier with smaller companies, as you know, just to get them there and they fully believe it. So that's really nice to see. Here are some of the certified healthy workplaces. The difference here in terms of the awards program is that these companies meet a threshold. They meet the criteria. The awards program is in a way competitive. We have 5 judges, from 5 different continents, scoring the award program, the award applications. So they get a score. The finalists come to the global summit. They get a small percentage there, and then there's a winner. It's a nice process in a way. It's really exciting, but of course, there's good companies who still deserve recognition, if they meet the criteria for a healthy workplace. So that's where this comes from. And you can see, all kinds of different countries represented here as well. So I think the last one, almost the last slide here, I wanted to outline some common elements. And this is what we see and have seen in the applications. And Stephen Bevan from the UK Institute of Employment Studies did a great job last year at our summit, summarizing. And Stephen is a judge, one of the 5 judges of the program, so he's very well qualified to do that for many reasons. So here are some of the key points, and you'll see the WHO model really kind of being in behind here. So you see some common elements we just heard. So clear business rationale for action, for having a program. It's part of the business objectives. Senior management support, again, so important, not just on a factual level, but also on a quote unquote emotional level. That's the hearts and minds statement here. As you will know, I think, or may have experienced yourself, the CEO is emotionally involved in terms of their personal experience. Sometimes they're the biggest supporters, of a program. Can go a long way, and you should be aware of that. The worker needs to have a voice and be involved in the design and the implementation, not just in terms of feedback, but really actually being involved, actively involved. And that the line manager needs to be part of that. Often programs kind of fail with the line manager involvement. You may get senior leadership, senior management involvement that they really they're gung ho, but the line managers are not supporting it. They're not in line, so to say. That's the key. That you need their engagement and their involvement as well. Talked about evaluation already. It's very, very important, and then also kind of learning from your interventions. Like some of the qualitative data that you get out of your interventions, also important. It's part of the continual improvement cycle, I think. Work is good for your health, especially good work is good for your health, right? There's a whole term of what good work is. The ILO uses decent work. It's really key, and it's good for not just for your health, but productivity and performance. So, and we could talk a long time what is good work, but it's really important. And then, of course, workability interventions. So redesigning your job. There's a whole host of research on, like reintegrating back into work, return to work, people with chronic disease, with injuries, of course, as well. And how do you adjust the job, and get them back to work as soon as possible, rather than having them out for weeks and months on hand. The longer they're out, the less likely they will come back, right? You know that. And then, risks and needs assessment in a participative manner is important to be conducted. And then, of course, your interventions should be mostly focused on prevention. So, that's and the psychosocial component needs to be part of it. So that's really kind of the good practice elements that we've seen, and I'm sure we'll see some others and more moving forward in our program. And the last one is I just really want to make you aware of the event. So, especially for those of you who are in Melbourne or close, but of course, doesn't matter where you are, you're welcome to come. We have people from all over the world coming to this, so it should be exciting. Very, very much looking forward to going down in about 5 weeks to Melbourne. So I'll keep it at that, Katrina, and then see what kind of questions we can get. I think we have another 10 minutes to go.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Wolf. And you've had a couple of questions come in and a call for more questions now. From Fred, is it possible to get a copy of the criteria for the Certified Healthy Workplace?
Yes, it is. First off, you can go to the website here. If you go to globalhealthyworkplace.org, you will see a button, well, up here, right? It says certification. You can go there, and the questionnaire is on there, which has the most information on the criteria. But otherwise, you can just contact me too if you don't find it right away, or I can send it to you. That's definitely.
Fantastic, thank you. Wolf. And while we're waiting for some further questions to come through, what are some of the major differences, Wolf, you observe from your global lens between countries in terms of their approaches to workplace wellness?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Obviously, you have some key cultural differences, especially around mental health and stigma. You think as a stigma in Australia, or you may think there's one in Germany, but not some other countries. It's way higher, so it's really a no-go area still. That's one, and there's many examples, and I think you're aware of some of them. But I think also like the system differences, how is the insurance system or the healthcare system structured plays a huge role. Like I said earlier, in the US, you have the employers carry the burden, so that plays a big role. So it's all about the money aspect, and that's why incentives play such a huge role. So it's really hard to say one country or another country is doing it better than others. I do see some really interesting approaches in terms of some countries from a kind of government perspective taking. Singapore is very interesting, and being closer to Australia than from here, some of you may be familiar with that the Ministry of Health has been very active, providing seed grants, guidance, facilitators, all of the above. So that's just one example. It doesn't always have to be that way, but I think the key thing here is, to your question, is that you can really learn from a variety of different countries from their approaches. So that's what we're trying to do really with the Global Center, to try exchange some of these views and really learn from them. So that's the key.
Fantastic, thanks, Wolf. And as you said, a great opportunity to hear more about some of those distinct approaches at the upcoming summit. We've had a question come through from Kerry regarding the offerings versus effectiveness. Should this mean we keep diversifying or streamlining our efforts? Can you repeat that? So I was going to say, slide. Yeah, go ahead. I'll repeat that again. So regarding the offerings versus effectiveness, I think that slide you presented earlier, should this mean we keep diversifying or streamlining our efforts? I'm not sure. It's kind of that question. I mean, I think there's many options for what could be the reason of that. I think it could be both, in terms of diversifying or streamlining. I think it just shows that a lot of programs, unfortunately, offered by providers. I mean, there's a lot of good vendors and providers out there, and they do a great job. But I think you still have a lot at the same time, which for lack of a better word, like cookie cutter programs, standard programs, and it's often the responsibility of the employer to take a closer look rather than just going for the kind of next best product or service. What fits with their corporate culture, with what they've been doing before and their existing programs and all that. I think that's really the key, that and a lot of companies don't make the extra effort to find that. I think that could be one of the main reasons. Fantastic. Thank you, Wolf. Another further question from Margaret. One of the earlier slides stated that EAP is one of the top wellness offerings of employers. What do you define as EAP? Is it an external provider or just counselling or broader support? Good question. Typically, the way EAP is used, it's fairly standardized these days, is an external provider. Where as an employee you can contact anonymously. It's either a hotline or it's off-site, so to say. If you see a person in person, if you see the counselor in person,
often you have a certain number of sessions as kind of, quantified 4 or 6 sessions to begin with, that kind of stuff. So there are some standards around. I'm not an expert in AAP, but that's the, the providers offer that mostly that way. But there are other counseling, obviously other counseling options or formats, and there's been some, quite a bit of movement in that area, as you probably know, in terms of some of the peer-to-peer programs and all that. So there are broader ones in terms of counseling, but I think EAP is fairly standardized on that side. And yeah.
Great, thank you, Wolf. I think we have time for one more question, one from Jessie. To what extent should wellness programs be shaped for different industry segments? For example, health versus finance industries.
Yes, they should. And I think it goes back to your needs assessment, and so to the continual improvement cycle. So the more thorough you are in terms of your needs assessment, the more targeted and strategic your program will be. And you need to not just do it once, you need to do that ongoing, and you need to kind of reevaluate and look and learn from what you've done. But I think, to your point, I think a program a program in the financial sector will look quite a bit different than one with, on a construction site or energy company, something like that. So that's really important. I think to tailor it and be strategic around it. And again, it's up to the employer, and obviously, there need to be vendors and providers kind of filling those needs, but the employer needs to make that step. They need to find out, what do we really need to do? What are the interests? What are the needs? And be as targeted and as strategic as possible.
Great, thank you, Wolf. And I think that brings us closer to the end of our time. So a heartfelt thank you for sharing your insights today. And hopefully it's really helped to identify some of the key global growth areas for our listeners for workplace wellness to really guide future planning. And what's the best way for people to reach out and get in contact with you if they're wanting to learn more about the summit or the services that you provide? Yeah,
so I guess the last slide, my contact slide, I didn't show. But there's 2 ways. Basically, one is, again, through the Global Healthy Workplace.org website, and there's a way to contact us through that. Or I think Katrina, you'll share my email address with the wk@wolfkirsten.com with a group. Feel free to follow up, and then, especially if I wasn't able to answer one of your questions, I'd be glad to talk to you. So I really appreciate that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Wolf. Yeah, and just to confirm, we'll send out, as we mentioned at the start of the webinar, just a very quick post-webinar survey. We'd love to hear your thoughts as to how you found today. We will include Wolf's details as well for those that would like to reach out. And also, if you are needing to further or seeking to further build the capability of your workplaces to develop a employee wellness strategy that works. Just a reminder that we have got our nationally accredited Wellness Wise Practitioner training coming up in Adelaide, Brisbane and Auckland, with some Sydney and Melbourne dates also to be announced shortly. So that includes the initial intensive 2-day course, followed by the ongoing support to help you embed key learnings back in the workplace, including one-on-one mentoring, access to our online hub, and also further professional development opportunities such as we've had here today. So, and also for those as a little bit more of an incentive, if you do know of anyone that could benefit again from the training, we've teamed up with Snackwise. If you do refer a colleague along to the training, you'll receive a delicious box of healthy snacks from Snackwise to the value of $250 to your door. So if you do have someone in mind, just stop by our Wellness Wise Academy website where you can find out more about that special time limited offer. So thank you again to Wolf. It's been a pleasure, and hopefully an opportunity for some of us to meet you when you're down in Melbourne in the coming weeks and continue the conversation there.
It would be great. It would be great to see you in person. That would be wonderful, all of you. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Wolf, and have a great day, everyone.